You've got a lot of boomers moving out over the next decade, some 70 million plus millennials, some 50 million plus Gen Zs, which are now going to be a part of your workforce. And I see that, we're not ready to, kind of work with them. Our practices, our policies, they are not suited for them.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the People Led Show. I'm your host, Shivangi, and our guest for today is the incredible Vikas Maheshwary. Vikas leads global HR transformation at Biocon, Biologics, where he's reshaping HR for future capabilities and also working on driving global expansion. Vikas has over 25 years of experience working with CEOs and business leaders from over 20 different nationalities, from managing M&As, enterprise performance, to building prescriptive analytics and global diversity solutions in both small and large companies. Vikas has truly done it all. I can keep listing Vikas's achievements all day, but I think it's time to hear from him directly. Welcome, Vikas. It's truly an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you, Shivangi. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So my first question right off the bat is, Vikas, since you've done so much, what next?
Okay, you've started with a curveball, literally. My daughter says that I should now move to photography. Enough of HR, enough of tech, enough of sales, and a whole lot of other things that I've done. So my wife thinks that, well, I should give it about another 10 years or something and then set up something of my own. A lot of my friends say that, hey, listen, now you should go and, set up your own solution because you know how to crack it in HR. So something that, has a tech element to it. So yeah, ideas galore. But if you really ask me, I'm really enjoying what I do. Okay, so if it was to me, my next is pretty much my present because a lot of things that I think I'm doing right now are fairly futuristic, if I could use that expression, and then they have a shelf life of longer than, let's say, a decade. So I'm happy being where I am. So the next for me is pretty much my present.
What do you like outside of work?
Yeah. So when I love basketball, okay, that's my passion. Photography is my passion. These are things that I will always find time for, no matter how busy I am. When I was in Dubai and I used to play this ball above all, reading comes naturally to me. I am old school that way. So when you're not seeing me in work, you'll see me at the court, you'll see me at the gym, or over the weekends, you'll find me going and being a clickster of some sort.
I wanted to understand a couple of work challenges that you're facing right now in your role, which is also something that I want to know a little bit more about. But what are your challenges as of today?
One of the biggest challenges that and least spoken about on the EX side, pretty much, is the advent of this new guard. So I call this the battle of the new guard versus the old guard. You've got a lot of boomers moving out over the next decade, some 70 million plus millennials, some 50 million plus Gen Zs, which are now going to be a part of your workforce. And I see that, we're not ready to, kind of work with them. Our practices, our policies, they are not suited for them. And if you ask me, that is one of the biggest challenges that is staring us, and we haven't really done much about it. The second big challenge that I think is, and this is more from an HR point of view, is that we in HR are still, when it comes to employee experience, we still think rangolis and we still think TGIFs and stuff like that. But I think if you look at the workforce, they've moved on from the rangolis and they expect a little more, or a little different. So there's lots that we need to do there. How do you unlock productivity? How do you make work more meaningful? How do you build a sense of purpose? These are cliched as they may sound, but they have a lot of meaning today. And the final one, which, there are tons, but the one that I would like to talk about is that there was a pre-COVID and a post-COVID. I know this is, again, extremely cliched, but I think the COVID kind of woke us up all massively. It helped us understand that, pre-COVID, if you ask me, most of the boardroom conversations when it came to people used to be around the matrices of manning. That, well, I needed so many people. Do I have so many people? So simple stats. The other was that we would throw people at problems, isn't it? But today, if you look at it, employees no more just another brick in the wall. We look at an employee and say, hey, listen, what's your contribution really to the complete value stream, and how do I enhance that? And that, I think, is where we are now moving. And there's lots that HR is doing and can do in that particular area. So I think that's pretty much where EX is headed, if you ask me.
It's interesting that you mentioned the pre-COVID versus the post-COVID scenario, because that's kind of changed the whole game, and something that you mentioned earlier, I want to bring that into the conversation about boomers moving out and, having
Yeah.
younger employees in the workforce, right? And also something that I read about is that your mission is to deliver hyper personalized HR journeys. What does that mean for Gen Z employees?
It is not as much to say that, okay, by age you are a certain classification of a gender, but what it means to them, okay, is something that is being derived by the socioeconomic factors. Okay. So what I'm trying to say, therefore, is that with this whole advent of the new generations or that mindset that is getting cultivated in an organization, the culture of an organization has to be relooked at. That how do you really want to build it? Okay. I think hyper personalization is more to say that given a certain persona in an organization, how are your benefits, how are your practices, how are your policies kind of articulated? And I keep saying that soon we will be talking about, policies by the people, for the people, of the people, because that's what true hyper personalization is today. We have technologies, we have tools, we have enough intelligence to, kind of really personalize that. A good example, just to leave you on that note, is to say that if I was like a youngster, about 21, 22, 23 years of age, does having something like a medical benefit really, really make sense to me? Well, it is important, but does it really appeal to me? Possibly not. What appeals to me is a dating allowance, or what appeals to me is a wedding allowance. Those are things that I would value more than anything because I don't look at health the way, let's say, a 40-year-old would look. Similarly, for a 40-year-old, a dating allowance and a wedding allowance, I don't think would make too much sense. No, what would make sense is okay, child education loan and things like that. But do we really think like that, or is it like a one size fits all? So those are the areas that are low hanging fruits, which a lot of us are solving for, have solved. But that's the start of hyper personalization, from learning to benefits to talent policies to the sheer job roles that you have in the organization to personalization on skills. There's lots that we need to do when it comes to hyper personalization.
Yeah, I feel like it's a pretty meta topic, right? And the deeper you get into it, the lesser it is because then there are so many segments. And you mentioned something about culture, and I want to know how
Yeah.
do you define culture?
In fact, I think this term culture, okay, as important and deep as it is, it's very misunderstood because the minute we say culture, we think, oh, one culture across the organization. There is not a single organization that has a one universal culture to define. You may have a vision, you may have a mission, you may have an objective that you are working to, you may have a sense of purpose as well. But that doesn't mean that the culture is same. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, Shivangi, you know this better than I do. But culture comes from this Latin word color, okay, which basically means cultivating. So my definition of culture pretty much is like the smell in the air. And I read this and I heard this from somebody who said, the best way to define a culture is that think about going to Calcutta, okay, in monsoons when it's extremely humid. What do you feel like? You feel like just having your rice and sleeping, all right? That's the culture. That's the smell in the air. And then you go to Goa somewhere in December. The minute you hit the airport, the first thing that you want to do is go to a beach, eat a lot of food, go for parties and do whatever because there's a lot of energy there. That's the culture. That's basically like the smell in the air. Now, what is the smell in the air in the organization that you cultivate? As the Latin word for culture that you cultivate would define, how you want to operate. But if you're going to cultivate a single kind of a culture, it may not be purposeful, But the best way to define or best way to achieve the objective is by start calling culture a working rhythm or a way of working. Because the minute you start looking at it as an optic from a way of working, you realize that okay, now you're making sense. So a little different thought on what culture really is, but I think it works. People who've done it have seen success, and therefore, in an organization like a Google, or for that matter, even Meta, you would find different cultures, okay, within teams.
Right. Culture as a working rhythm is such a nice way to imagine it and put emotion to it. And your example is definitely like of Goa and Calcutta definitely made me rethink it in a very different manner. But I want to know what is your view of what breaks culture at an organization? Like what are the elements that actually harm it?
Not just culture, but what really harms an organization is pretty much what I would call noise, which emerges from the fact that you are not productive. I mean, if you really think deeply about it, you call it politics, you call it negativity, you call it, whatever, whatever, whatever. But it all stems from the fact that somebody is not being productive somewhere. All right. Because people have time at hand to do things. Why? Because they're not being productive. So therefore, they indulge in politics. Therefore, the culture breaks. So that's the start point. The second that breaks is I've always believed, bottlenecks are always at the top. So if you look at a bottle, the bottleneck is not at the bottom of a bottle, it's always at the top, right? So it's important that what leaders do, in conversations where nobody's watching them. That's more important than what leaders do in conversations where everybody is watching them. So two things. One is, are people productive? If they're not productive, you've got a big problem at hand. It'll break everything, not just culture. And the second is the demonstrated behaviors of leadership in closed door conversations when nobody's watching them. That's important.
And typically, people, have engagement scores. People have
Yeah.
NPS. People
Yeah.
like that's kind of like how HR tracks productivity of an employee. What are you looking at? What are your key metrics of success for an employee?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because you asked me this question right up front, that what's your next? I mean, this is what I was talking about. I call this the enterprise performance management.
All right.
Okay, you'll have to stay with me to understand what this is. And that this, I think, is pretty much what every HR leader has been looking at, that how do I solve all my problems in one go? Okay, you can't solve all your problems in one go. There's no magic wand with this. But EPMO, as I call it, enterprise performance management, solves for a lot of it. So traditionally, if you look at, HR has driven performance, okay, by doing performance management cycles. But what have we really driven? We have driven process of a performance management. Okay, we haven't driven performance management. I think the solving of the problem is to understand the purpose of performance management. You cannot be reactive about performance management. It's HR to solve for being proactive about performance management. Can you, as HR, drive this? Yes. By being what? By being predictive. If somehow you could predict at a goal or a KPI level that what your performance is going to be today, and are you going to achieve this or not achieve this? And if you're not going to be able to achieve this is all prediction. What is the prescriptive action that I can take to protect that daily run rate of mine? The day you get into that kind of an ecosystem, you have no idea the kind of delight that you would have driven across the organization with employees would be massive, because people would be able to protect their performance, drive productivity, and therefore get rewarded for it. And I keep saying, a happy employee is not somebody who gets trophy perks. A happy employee is somebody who's productive. Okay, and that's what HR needs to do, and that's what we call as the enterprise performance management.
So when you talk about predictive analysis, are there 2 to 3 tools that you use for employees for predictive analysis and listening, both of them?
The first thing that we need to solve for is something that HR traditionally has forgotten to do. We used to do it very well early days, 50, 60 years back, which is setting up the whole goals in the organization. We have the philosophy with us. We know that, okay, there is an organizational objective, OKRs, okay, and then you drill it down, then you start cascading. The problem is that if you actually lift up any goal sheet in the organization, most of the organizations, those are not KPIs or goals or anything. They're basically intent statements. The second challenge that you will find in most of these, KPIs, goals, OKRs, tomato to me. But what you will find is that they do not have a parent-child relationship or a cause and effect relationship. That how do you predict that, if something was to go, or a KPI at N-5 level was to misbehave, how does this impact the entire goal tree all the way to the top organizational goal that you want to achieve? Do you have the cause and effect relationship? No. So the first problem to solve is establish a cascading and a causality between goals. So set up your goal trees, which is stemming from the top organizational objectives. Make them extremely objective. Do not have whatever you want to call them, OKRs and this and that, but make them extremely objective because they have to be measurable. And then there are tools, as you said, which help you drive predictives. Today, I've kind of inducted a data studio. And then you will get about 60, 70, 80% accuracy once you've done a lot of testing. And after that, you roll it out, and then prescriptives come over a period of time. You monitor actions. So saying that if this was the predictive, these were the 4 actions, which is the one that the employee chose and saw a result. Capture that data, and maybe next year you will have a list of repository and prescriptive. So it's a journey, if you ask me. So this is more HR processes, and then enabling it with the tool, rather than bringing in the tool and then wiring your HR processes. Yeah. So that's the approach that we should have on this.
I feel like employee also needs to trust the organization to be able to be candid about their intent. I know that trust is super important, but how important is it for you?
Yeah. No, I mean, you've called upon a very raw nerve. I mean, true. Trust doesn't get built overnight. Okay. Yeah. Let's understand the reasons why trust breaks, because building is a long process, but The biggest problem is that we don't know why trust is breaking. And that's where we come up with things like unconscious bias, where
Right.
managers tend to do certain things which they think are right. Most managers still in a lot of countries have this whole mentality that, oh, well, this is my kingdom, and these are people who report
Hmm.
to me. You will find them use, well, meet Nisha's, she reports to me. And there's a sense of pride,
Hmm.
when a lot of managers say this, which I call is the unconscious bias. So managers can build trust by first identifying what breaks trust. I've known of managers who still value presenteeism over productivity. All right. And then to build the trust, I think one of the basic, most important, always works kind of action is response. Okay, the answers to the most complicated questions are usually the simplest ones, isn't it? So just respond with
Hmm.
transparency, saying that, well, this I can solve, getting solved will be solved. But if you don't respond just because you don't have an answer, you are creating a bigger, much bigger problem.
So there are, like, from what I see, there are there's a two-step process for building trust. One is listening, second is acting. In terms of listening, are there short channels that you can recommend to other HR leaders that for sure work? Like it could be something as simple as newsletters, right? Or like something as complex as surveys or anything that has you can tell for sure that works.
Right. So, but then, I don't agree that survey is listening. Okay, survey is still asking. There used to be a framework on feedback. It used to be used more on the customer side of affairs. It used to be called ACAF: ask, categorize, act, follow up. Okay, ACAF framework. I think it's lived its life. The shelf life of
Yeah.
that whole thing is now over. If you really want to move from asking to listening, then stop asking. Survey is still asking. What is listening is, let's say, things like ONA, organizational network analysis. It's such a beautiful methodology which ensures that you're not asking at all. You're reading data that is generated in the organization using NLP, semantic, whatever, and then you're figuring out that what is the true sentiment and what you have to do. And if you really have to ask, then don't be, don't be, don't ask event based. I've seen organizations who do feedbacks just around the performance management cycle. Everybody's going to say great things because now they're scared that if they kind of give you a negative score, you're going to ding them on the score that you owe them on their ratings. But as I said, if you're not responding to what happens in that whole so-called survey, then
Hmm.
it's going to get rejected. Because if I don't act when people for like 3-4 times continuously have flagged health problems, and I
Hmm.
don't go back and act on that with the employee saying what has happened, let me fix up something for you, then people don't see value in it. Okay, then it's just a data that HR collects. What did you do about that? ONA is another one that we need to explore a little more in the HR fraternity.
But how can organizations deal with sensitize managers a little bit more? Or, if an example that you can give. So,
So I think organizations need to give a manager the reason to go and upskill and get their management skills in place. That reason cannot be just things like, well, you're not a good manager. The GPTW, the scores that have come up, they don't give you a good rating. People will always have rebuttals and a lot of arguments around that. But when you start rewarding those behaviors, okay, and hear me clear and loud on this, that when you start rewarding right behaviors, that's when the true change really happens in an organization. But if you're just going to be doing the whole I'm going to ding you kind of an approach, then it typically doesn't work. Create the ecosystem for learning, but don't push
hmm.
learning down somebody's throat. You could give a start point in a classroom saying that, hey, listen, this happens, and this is what unconscious bias is. But after that, you got to help and handhold the manager to kind of go through the whole process of understanding unconscious bias, which I think is a big problem. And the right solution really is the unconscious bias learning environment.
I have just like the last couple of questions left for you. What is one HR area when automated flawlessly could slash manual work, say by 30%?
Yeah, okay. If it's just going to be one area, then I'll just pick up something that I've been talking about for a long time, which is the establishing of the whole skills center of excellence. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick Twitter version of the whole skills UAE, though I would preferably take about an hour to explain this. But broadly, it picks up a role in an organization. There's a technology, there are tools and all of that. They use a
Hmm.
bit of net parsing, scraping, ethical, whatever, and they get a skills inventory or a skills repository for that role. And mind you, these skills are not those generic 30,000 feet in the air skills. For a production guy, this would be autoclave, hardcore granular level skills, and gets the skills from where? It basically benchmarks for that role. So if you were, let's
Right.
say, a HRBP in a certain organization, I create a comparator basket in the technology and say, listen, go to the best of the best, go to Amazon, Pfizer, Google, this, that, and pick up these skills that those people possess or the companies are asking for. And that becomes my benchmark. And I also get something known as the proficiency level, that at this skill level, or a skill, what is the kind of proficiency level that the role holder needs to have? Then the same technology also brings back that which is the world's most consumed learning program, okay, for this
Mm-hmm.
particular skill. Okay, and where does it sit? Does it sit on Instagram, on YouTube, on Udemy, on Coursera, or wherever? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the best part that this tech also brings back that for this skill, what is the world paying? So there's a dollar value to the skill. Now, this is the data that you've got. Now, imagine if you have all of this data, okay, all you have to do is put it into a certain tool. And now an HRBP within your organization has a certain amount of skill, profiling, etc. By the way, these are not competencies that I'm calling out. These are
Right.
skills, okay?
Right.
So they get those skills at a granular level, and they know for their current role, these are the 8, 9 skills that they need to have. They go through
Yeah.
an assessment and feedback and all of that, and they get a score. And they say, well, I'm 80% there. But given skill adjacencies, because a lot of roles would have similar skills being asked for. So given skill adjacencies, the system also throws up that while your role is an HRBP, but you know what? You could get into this particular other role in so-and-so department because you have 80% of a skill adjacency or a skill match. Okay, now your whole purpose in life to grow would really be to kind of prepare yourself for those 20% of the skills that you don't have for that particular role. The minute you prepare for that, assess yourself, you're 100% ready for the aspired role. The talent pool automatically gets created. The HR knows, or the talent people know, that this is the pool of people who are ready for that particular role that I was
Right.
thinking of. Let's pick them up, and that's how you drive internal mobility. This
Internal.
is
Yeah.
if somebody wants to really invest, so enterprise performance management and establishing a skill center of excellence is where our next year's budget should really be pumped into, to drive better EX. So for us, the go live date is next month, in January. It's going to go live, and we're fairly ready for it. Yeah.
That's great. All eyes on you, I guess, then. But
Okay.
what is the one piece of advice you would like to give to first time CHROs?
Okay. I think if you're picking up the C in the HR after whatever number of years of experience, I think first is that you got to be ready that okay, you got to unlearn a lot of things and kind of apply some new things, and think of HR is equal to tech is equal to marketing. Why I say that is because we launch policies, we do so much stuff, tick in the box, but do we market it well? If you think of a policy as a product, okay, and this is where product thinking comes into HR. When you think of a policy as a product which is possibly launched by, let's say, Louis Vuitton or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, what do
Mm-hmm.
they do along with the launch of a product? Okay, they do a lot of promotions around it. They help people understand the WIFM, what's in it for me. Okay, and then the most important thing that they do is they reiterate and keep improving and keep getting better at it. What do? We launch a policy, put it in a certain folder, send an email, mass mail, our job is done. After 4, 5, 7 years, somebody would revise the policy. That's the change that we want to bring in. That's the marketing side of it. The tech side of it is that HR, the same practices, same policies can be enabled, can be done better through a lot of technology. Some of this technology is fairly disruptive, but have the courage to embrace that. And so HR is equal to tech is equal to marketing is my one piece of advice for all the new CHROs or the first time CHROs.
And I feel like with leaders like you, there is so much to look forward to in the Indian HR space, in the industry space. So thank you for all your point of views that are going to blow some minds for sure.
Thanks, Shivangi. Thank you for having me. I love the questions that you asked. I just hope that some people find value in what they listen to. I'm happy to take whatever questions they have in the near future.
Awesome.